All right, sounds good. Well, welcome everyone. We are so glad you're joining us for the kickoff of the Alliance for Decision Education Summer Lunch and Learn sessions. This is the first time we're doing this. This is truly the kickoff of this new series. We have a lot of great topics and featured guests every Monday in June and July. So we hope you can join us for many of them. And my colleague Kevin will share a link in the chat for more information and registration links for the whole series of sessions. But in our kickoff session today, we will be talking about understanding cognitive biases and perception gaps for better civil discourse and decision making. So I'm Alison Stumacher, a Deputy Director of Education here at the Alliance for Decision Education. I'm joined by James Coan, he'll give a wave. He's the Executive Director of More Like Us. And James is going to share a little bit more about himself and the work of More Like Us in a little bit. I know I'm really looking forward to hearing from him. And we've presented together before. There's just so much overlap between our work. So we're so appreciative, James, of you being here with us today. So before we get started, just to share a little bit about who I am. I'm a former classroom teacher, an instructional coach. I was an instructional coach supervisor and have been in the field of education for over 20 years. And I really love talking about decision-making skills. So when I came to the Alliance 4 years ago, I knew very, very little about decision-making, except that I do it all the time, every day, just like all of us. And what I've learned in my time here at the Alliance has dramatically shifted the way that I consume information and think about uncertainty and approach decision making. And I'm really grateful to have a chance to share some of that with you today. So here is a quick roadmap for today's Lunch and Learn. So many of you, I believe, are new to our organization and the work that we're doing. So I'm going to begin just by briefly talking a bit about what decision education is. And we'll dip our toes into cognitive biases and how they impact our thinking and why intellectual humility can improve how we engage in civil discourse and make decisions. And then James later will dive into the concept of perception gaps and how they negatively impact political discourse. And then we'll have a nice, robust time for questions at the end. If you have any questions along the way, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'd love to get to them all. So to start, what is decision education? We get this question a lot here at the Alliance. Decision education is the teaching and learning of skillful judgment formation and decision making. It is an interdisciplinary approach to teach students the skills and dispositions for how to think, not what to think. And this part is really important. It's a point that we emphasize that decision education is not prescriptive in terms of what the good decisions are. We're not going to tell you to choose the apple over the candy bar. What decision education does is help young people develop skills and tools for making decisions rationally, getting clear about what they care about in a decision, and give them tools for getting closer to what is true and what to do in an uncertain world. So here at the Alliance, just to share a little bit about who we are, if you're new to us, we were founded in 2014, and we are a national nonprofit movement builder, which means we want to partner with all the people and all the organizations who care about this work. Our mission is to improve lives by empowering students with the essential skills for making better decisions. And as many of you know, if you're here, these skills are particularly crucial for navigating today's complex and very polarized political landscape. And some folks know, many don't, that decision-making skills and decision science have been taught for years in higher ed and in many industries like medicine and law and finance. And our vision is to make sure that decision education becomes part of every K-12 student's learning experience. So why is decision education important? Research for over 60 years in many fields like cognitive psychology and decision science shows that human thinking is very prone to systematic errors, which influence the decisions we make. We're just not hardwired to be good decision makers. And that doesn't mean that we don't sometimes get it right, or that we don't have good outcomes to our decisions sometimes. But every decision outcome is influenced by two factors. So chance, or some people call it luck, and our decision-making skills. And we cannot control chance, and chance could be where we were born, the time period we live in, societal structures in the places we live, or like sneezing when you drive through an intersection, right? We don't have control over that, but we can control our decision-making skills. And unfortunately, for the most part, our thinking is pretty flawed naturally. And so today we're going to explore just a little bit about how that can show up in decision making, and particularly in discourse. And the last thing I'll say before we dive into a little experiment is that we believe that by improving students' decision-making skills, they can be better prepared as a workforce for the changing world that we're all living in. And we can reduce political polarization in civil discourse, diminish the risks for dangerous behaviors, and improve mental health. So that's a lot. We're not going to accomplish all of that today. But we are going to try a little fun experiment. Again, I love talking about decision making, so I think this is fun. Hopefully you'll think it's fun too. I'm very hopeful that the technology will work and this goes off without a hitch. This is something this demonstration is something we don't usually do over a live Zoom meeting, but we're going to try it here. So in a moment, Kevin, the real Kevin Parkinson, is going to put two links in the chat. If you have a birthday between January and June, you're going to click Form A. And if you have a birthday in July to December, you're going to click Form B. So only fill out the one form that correlates to your birthday month. And you're going to see a couple questions in that form in a moment. So this is a really, really serious honor system situation here. I'm begging you, please do not Google anything. No chat GPT, just use your brain. So there's no grade for this. You are not going to get gold star if you get the right answer. Just please use the knowledge that exists in your brain and nothing else to make some estimations. So you're going to have just a minute or two to do this. It's very short. And when you're finished, you can just comment done in the chat. Kevin, you want to put those into? Great. Thank you. And remember, just do the form that's correlated with your birthday month. See lots of responses rolling in here. All right, it looks like we may have hit a slowdown. So if you haven't finished, you can keep going. I think most people have got their responses in. Okay, so each of you, all of you, every one of you who filled out this form were asked to estimate the population of Santa Fe, New Mexico. So in the chat, I'm going to ask you to share just one thing. What factors led you to your estimate, and just a brief description of your thinking process. How did you come up with your estimate? And Kevin, maybe you can share out some of these.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
All right. So Mark has shared that he was thinking about Kansas City and he thought that that was about 400,000. Michael has been to Santa Fe before, so he used his experience having been to that location. Dan knew that it was the capital city and thought that that might mean that it had more people, so he voted for over. Jules compared it to her hometown, which she knows is larger than 100,000. Liz was also there, and it was during a very quiet time of the year. So she based it off that and sort of the locals that were in the restaurant. Diaz says that it's a city they've heard of, so it must be on the bigger side.
Great. So it sounds like, and you can continue to put your thinking into the chat so other participants can read. But it seems like a lot of thoughtful reasoning went into your estimates. Um, okay, so I'm gonna now show you something about your forms. So if you filled out Form A before you gave your estimate, you saw this question: is the population of Santa Fe, New Mexico greater or less than 50,000? And if you answered Form B, you saw, is the population of Santa Fe, New Mexico greater than or less than 200,000? So almost the exact same question with a different point that you were deciding whether it was greater than 50,000 or 200,000. So at the end of the session, after James shares, I'm going to revisit this group's specific data, but I wanted to show you data from another group in which we ran this experiment. And this data is pretty typical of what happens when an experiment like this is conducted. So for most groups, and this what you're seeing on the screen was the data from an actual group, and I believe it's actually the last time James and I presented together. This was the data from that group. So what the population estimates end up looking like is this. So I'm going to explain this. So the average population of the green group, which in our session today was Form A, tends to be much lower than the population of the pink group or Form B. So why would this be? There's nothing particularly unique about the groups. You were assigned to these groups, to these forms somewhat randomly, or at least I don't really know when your birthdays are, so I didn't know who was going to be in which group. So what would lead one group to estimate so differently than the other? Plus, you all did a lot of really thoughtful thinking, which you shared in the chat. So the difference between these two average estimates is due to a cognitive bias called the anchoring effect. Our brains are hardwired to take mental shortcuts. You might be familiar with this. These are called heuristics. And generally, these shortcuts are very, very helpful. They allow us to have mental efficiency so that we don't have to wade through all of the information and stimuli that our brains are taking in constantly. We have these super, super helpful shortcuts that help us instead. But sometimes these shortcuts lead to errors. And in the case of the experiment we just did, the error is due to a cognitive bias called the anchoring effect. And the anchoring effect leads our brains to place too much emphasis on the first piece of information we receive, regardless how relevant it is, and then adjust from that data point and usually insufficiently. So how did that work here? So each group saw a different question with a distinct data point before making their estimates. So Form A folks were asked if the population was greater or less than 50,000. Form B was asked whether it was greater or less than 200,000. In neither case did we tell you anything about the population of Santa Fe. But for most of us, our brains anchor on that first data point and we adjust our thinking. So the green group, which was anchored on a much lower number, 50,000, on average tends to produce much lower population estimates than the Form B or pink group, which is anchored on a much higher number. So at the end of the session, I'm going to show you your actual data to see if this group was somehow able to resist that bias. It happens. It might have happened here. So stay tuned. But the important point here is that surely you thought that your estimate was based on things like prior knowledge or smart analytical thinking, or maybe you just thought it was a wild guess. And what most people don't realize is that their thinking is also influenced by completely unrelated information that their brain took in. So I know we're all here to think about civil discourse. So what does this have to do with civil discourse? If we know that our brains are hardwired for errors outside of our control, this can help us enter discourse with a more open mind and a willingness to accept that our thinking might be flawed. So, like it says here, if I can be misled by a random number, what else might I be wrong about? And this is just one example of one cognitive bias, but there are dozens more that create flaws in our thinking in a whole host of ways that most of us are not even aware of. And our viewpoints, the confidence we have in our opinions and our viewpoints is really outsized considering how many thinking errors we make. So a second point here is that normalizing being wrong or entertaining the possibility of being wrong is a rational way to behave. Intellectual humility is a mindset that protects us from our many, many blind spots. So, knowing that you don't have all of the answers in a given conversation or debate or situation can lead us to being more open to learning new things or changing our minds. And then finally, cognitive biases are not the flaws of others. They're not the flaws of the people we disagree with or the people who hold views that we don't like. They are a feature of being human. If you are human and you have a brain, you are falling prey to cognitive biases all the time, just like I am, just like everybody from the Alliance and on this call is. So, entering civil discourse with this as a foundational understanding is key for respectful dialogue. So if we think about all of the places where civil discourse is taking place, so in town halls, in classrooms, and in the halls of government, and very notably online, imagine all of those spaces, or imagine a world where we approach these conversations from a stance of intellectual humility or asking, what might I be missing? So evidence-based really matters deeply to us at the Alliance, and as I know, to many of the educators on this call. So I just want to share two small pieces of evidence supporting this. In two different studies, researchers found that intellectual humility supports dialogue by lowering defensiveness and increasing openness to opposing views. And importantly, people and groups who show intellectual humility tend to make more accurate judgments. So the good news for educators is that intellectual humility is something we can nurture in the classroom, and this has been studied. So here are just some examples. This is by no means exhaustive of prompts that can be woven into classrooms in any subject area and across many grade levels to support intellectual humility and nurture this in your students. And at the end, we will share a QR code that will link to our teacher resources where we offer lessons and school models that can help you bring this to your classrooms. So I'm going to turn it over now to James, who is going to be talking about perception gaps. But while he's doing that, I'm going to be looking at your data. And by the end of the session, I will have an updated graph to see how susceptible this group was to anchoring effect, or if we weren't susceptible to it at all. And I will also tell you the true population of Santa Fe, New Mexico. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you, James.
Okay, great. Thanks, Allie. So let me get this up. Or can everyone see this? I'll make it a little larger. Okay, good. Sorry, just have to put it in the right view. Okay, good. Should be ready to go. So first of all, thanks to Allie and Kevin and the Alliance for Decision Education for having me. Exciting to be part of the first of this Lunch and Learn series. So a little bit about me. Unlike Allie, I do not have an education background. I was in energy for 15 years. So I got a degree in public policy at a think tank and then an energy consultant. And these are pretty consultant-y slides, but hopefully not too wordy. But the 2016 election really affected me. I was concerned that my country was tearing itself apart. Wasn't quite sure what was wrong, what I could do about it. But over time, I became increasingly influenced by this finding of perception gaps, or more similar than we tend to realize across the political spectrum, which I'll cover. So I started another organization called Red Blue Together, I shared stories of friends and those in close relationships across the political spectrum. I did a lot of volunteering for an organization some of you may have heard of called Braver Angels, and now co-founder and executive director of More Like Us, which through this presentation I'll talk more about. So the consulting approach is to give all the answers up front. So this is what I'll be covering in this presentation. So perception gaps are these differences between perceptions and reality, kind of bias or distortion, when thinking about those in the other political party or who might identify in the other political party, and they're systematically skewed toward thinking that they're more different, they're more threatening. They're less willing to have conversations or less willing to hear about us. And there are some serious consequences for conversations, because if we think these people are totally different and don't want to hear from us or possibly threatening, a lot of people are going to be dissuaded from having conversations or pretty antagonistic when trying to engage with these seemingly unusual, threatening people. Thankfully, a lot of academic literature shows that they can be addressed, they can be corrected. More Like Us offers some free resources for the classroom and elsewhere in society that we'll talk about, and we'll focus especially on a lesson plan. We're working with Georgetown University, the Civic Education Research Lab, to test this lesson plan about perception gaps, causes, consequences, and potential solutions. So first I'll give examples of these misperceptions, often called perception gaps, and say why they're problematic, but also probably addressable, and then look at how they can work, how we can talk about them and correct them in the classroom. So some of these examples. So I think this is a really stark way to look at it from a group called Beyond Conflict when asking Americans about immigration. So people are asked, what do you think those in the other party think of the positions of your party? People are like, oh, people will think that I'm totally an extremist, right? Like, and you get this really polarized view on the left, right? It looks like a valley, right? So a perception that all Republicans are on one side, all Democrats are on the other, almost no one's in the middle. And then on the right, we get what reality is like. And there's people all across the political spectrum. There are definitely differences between Democrats and Republicans when it comes to immigration and other topics, but they're not as stark as people realize. And I wouldn't really call it polarized, right? It's more like a mountain range. It's not like there's a massive dip in the middle. There are Americans all along this spectrum when it comes to immigration and on other topics. Then there are conversation misperceptions, thinking that people are going to act with hostility, for instance, during a conversation. This comes from a group called More in Common, which coined the term perception gaps. And when people are asked, do you think it's fine to act with hostility during a political conversation? Only about 1/8 of people say yes, same in both parties. But then people are asked, well, what share of those in the other party do you think would be okay with acting with hostility? And it's almost half. So it's this big distortion thinking that so many more people will act with hostility than likely in reality. And then we get into threat precursors and actual threat of those in the other party. This comes from Pew from 2016 to 2022, where there are really negative adjectives to describe those in the other party. And this is not exactly a perception gap, but we know that this can't comport with reality, right? Both people and both parties can't be more closed-minded and immoral than the other, right? In reality, it's a negative perception of them as worse, as inferior than they really are. And then actual threat. So this is a graph, and there'll only be one more after this. I'll hold off, and there won't be endless amounts of data that I show here. But this is about willingness to break democratic norms. There are 7 norms listed on the right of the slide. And you see that there's this remarkable similarity between Democrats and Republicans. In the darker blue, how many would you actually break or condone breaking? And there's a few, but not that many. The median is somewhere in 20s out of 100. But then how many democratic norms do you think they would break? The median is more in the 60s out of 100, right? The skew that we think they are going to break more than probably they're likely to break. So this overly negative, overly threatening distortion. And then finally, end with political violence. Some of the starkest differences. This is from the Polarization Research Lab from Dartmouth and Penn. And Americans are asked every single week, been asked every single week for more than the past 2 years about this specific incident where someone would throw a rock at a peaceful protester in the other political party. You see this massive gap, and again, very symmetrical. Would you think this is okay? 2-3% of Americans think it's okay. What share of people do you think in the other party think it's all right to do this? Oh, almost half of them. So you get this massive gap of more than 10x thinking that just everyday Americans are much more threatening than they really are. Okay, so these probably look kind of concerning, but what are the actual impacts of all this? And let's have some hope. And what can we do about them? So a lot of the focus here is about civil discourse, thinking about the classroom, and decision science. There's an overlap with economics. Let's think about quantity and quality, right? The quantity of conversations. So, right, if people think this about another group, right, there is some relationship between thoughts and attitudes and feelings about another group and behaviors toward them. It's not always one-to-one, but there's some relationship. And if one thinks that someone on the other side is totally different, will act with hostility during a conversation, and might be threatening toward me, probably some people are not going to want to engage at all. And then on the quality side, even if they do engage, there's probably a great deal of skepticism, potentially gotcha questions that people default to, and not particularly civil discourse in terms of interacting. Also, it can impact how people talk about those on the other side, even if you're in an area that might be generally one party is much more prominent than the other, right? It matters how people talk about those in the other political party and outgroup, in the terminology of social psychology. And then we can think about broader societal issues, right? So if people overestimate all these problems, especially about threat, right, there might be a desire to vote more for a fighter against the other side than for someone who wants to collaborate, or more support for authoritarianism, which some academic research shows is activated by a sense of threat to safety and security. But a lot of this threat, as we see, is overblown. And there can't even be greater acceptance of mis and disinformation, because a lot of that, when trying to evaluate content, some is about the content itself, but often people think about, well, who is providing this content? And if this content comes from someone who's seen in a really negative light, there can be a great deal of skepticism, even if the content is quite valid, or greater acceptance of content from someone who, at least they oppose this bad group, but they're on kind of my side, so it can be accepted even if the content itself isn't very truthful. So, okay, with all that scary stuff, luckily there's some positives here. Stanford ran the Strengthening Democracy Challenge. So they took hundreds of submissions of 8 minutes or less, tested the top 25, and many of these interventions that were all done on a computer, really short, reduced political animosity. Almost all of them did. But only a few of them achieved all the goals that the researchers were looking for, reducing anti-democratic attitudes, support for political violence, and partisan animosity. And what we see is that 2 of the 3 that did so well focused on correcting misperceptions, on correcting these perception gaps. The one in the bottom left used a variant of the data that I showed before about breaking democratic norms, that people in the other political party are much less willing to break them than we assume. And the one on the right used the data that I showed about immigration, showing that actually there are views all along the spectrum, not just these 2 polarized points of totally open borders or no immigrants at all. So then, okay, let's talk about how this works in the classroom. So More Like Us, we have three main resources. I'll primarily talk about the first one that I show here, but I'll mention them all. And they're all available at morelikeusorg/resources. So first is this lesson plan, which I'll talk about it in more detail. Then we have Similarity Hub. Right now, we've aggregated 550 unique survey data points that show overlaps between Democrats and Republicans or supermajorities, at least 70% of all Americans, and it's organized by more than 20 topic areas. SimilarityHub.org, you just click on a topic and suddenly you often see dozens of data points that show these overlaps that are really surprising. Because many people will say, oh, maybe we can find some common ground. We're like, we've already found it 550 times. So, feel free to just share it, could be useful for the classroom. And then finally, on the right-hand side, we have guidance for those in the arts and creatives, portraying people in a better and more accurate light. And I can talk about that more if people are interested. But think of, say, like Will and Grace, portraying gay people in a better light, but also sometimes like Roseanne, sometimes humanizing the white working class. And so showing people as more complex, admirable, similar, worthy of togetherness, recasting them, CAST, in a better light. So if you want to get more creative, you could always talk about that. But I will focus on the lesson plan, kind of the structure of the lesson plan. First, uses the data that I showed about immigration. There's a sticky note exercise, so letting the students say, okay, where do you think an average Democrat is on this scale from completely open borders to completely closed borders, recognizing that immigration is more complicated than that. That's a nice starting point. And then watching the video that did really well in the Strengthening Democracy Challenge that uses this data about immigration and also covers a bit about dehumanization. So actually people overestimate how much the other side dehumanizes them. They think we're monkeys, but they don't. And then we get into some of these examples of perception gaps, like I showed here. And finally, there's options to go in various directions. So what are some of the causes of perception gaps, especially perverse incentives? In the media environment for politicians, what are some consequences, which I talked a little bit about, and what are some potential solutions? And there's also some other optional opportunities to use Similarity Hub or to really get into solutions. Uh, so we are working with the Civic Education Research Lab at Georgetown, and previously we had some students fill out after they took an earlier version of the lesson plan, which was only supposed to last for a class period or two. How did they like it? And we got some pretty positive feedback. Sarah was comfortable writing this into a research report and presenting it at a conference. The lesson plan was clear. Material was balanced. I understand political the political views of Americans better. I'm a little more empathetic. And here's some quotes from students. These are juniors and seniors at a private school about an hour outside of DC. And I'm feel more sympathetic. You know, they seem less radical than I thought. I would have thought that their views are more, are more apart, more distant, surprised at the amount of overlap. We're all humans. These are some of the feedback that we got. And where the lesson could fit during the school year, I'm open to a lot of ideas, but when discussing political parties, when covering public opinion data, when motivating students to have civil discourse, when discussing current events, to put this in context about potential differences. And right, I'm sure, there are others, and there's ways to do cross-disciplinary options, like I mentioned with the guidance for those in the arts. Maybe there's an ELA connection. I know people have talked to me about statistics classes with the public opinion data. And, oh, sorry. And yeah, so now we are working with Cyril at Georgetown Civic Education Research Lab to test this in a more robust way with more students, probably in the fall. Although, if you're looking for something to do for a single class period at the end of the year, happy to do it in the spring. Um, and this, QR code also on the website has the lesson plan in both a pre and post survey to see, what is the impact of actually going through this kind of lesson plan, this information. And here's, really getting into the nitty gritty of just details. With private schools, often there's a lot less red tape, also true with charter schools. But happy to work with anyone at public schools if there's approval needed at a district level to go through those processes. So you would be able to try this, or teachers in your district could try it. And always feel free to reach out to me. Also, yeah, if you contact me, James at morelikeus.org, I can send you this PowerPoint. So just let me know. And yeah, we got 23 minutes for questions after we learn about the data.
Yeah, so this isn't the most random group, but James, if you can stop sharing, I can show how our data panned out. So I will tell you there was a strong outlier data point that I did remove. So I'll tell you that in a moment, just so I can be forthcoming about that. But this is how our group estimated. This was the average estimates for each group of the population of Santa Fe. The difference between the two groups was much closer than it is in the group I showed you before. So we're a little less susceptible to that effect. Also, we had one outlier in Form A, which is this green group that had estimated 2.5 million. So I pulled that out because it was very distant from the other data points, but that actually would have brought these bars up pretty close. So not as susceptible as some other groups we've worked with. I don't know, give yourself a pat on the back, maybe, even though we know this is all part of being human. So we do, and again, oh, I missed the Q&A. There it is. Okay. So we do want to open it up for Q&A. I know there were some in the chat. These can be questions about intellectual humility, cognitive bias, perception gap, either of our organizations, or anything that feels relevant. And I will stop sharing so we can see each other.
Thanks for that to you both. Yeah, this has been wonderful. I really appreciate hearing it. Super fascinating work. And we had one question in the chat, and Mark, I hope you'll allow me to restate your questions ever so slightly, but if it feels off to you, please let me know. You both presented great insights that once you're engaged in a conversation, how to have a more civil dialogue and being aware of the tricks that our minds are playing on us. But Mark wants to know how we get to the table in the first place. How do we surround ourselves in an environment where we're increasingly separated? How do we enter into the table in the first place? I'm wondering if either of you have any insights on that.
Well, so I mean, so I guess with Mark, are you talking about in the classroom or in general, or uh,
Um, I guess even family discussions or discussions around the neighborhood. I have two mega brothers and I live in a mega neighborhood in rural Colorado. And to do that, I've also been on Braver Angel calls where they want us to talk about across conservative lines, but nobody conservative has come to that. So we just end up talking to ourselves one on one. So it's, I guess it's how to get, you know, engage the other side.
yeah. So I mean, so one thing. Okay, so I'll go in a couple different directions. I mean, the perception gaps work is often right to make people more comfortable, right? Even doing that, right? So there's a concept known as intergroup anxiety, which, right, if people have all these negative views of those in the other party, they're probably gonna have a lot of anxiety about even doing something as simple as talking to each other, or seemingly simple, right? Then what I didn't cover here is I do think that there are some like stop, drop, and roll type things to keep in mind about how to have conversations. So we talk about something that's not here, but it's called civil, SVL. So share stories, relate to their values, and listen. This comes from Rob Willer at Stanford, but just tweaked so it's a little more memorable. So, just keep that in mind. Like rather than drowning people in data, which is ironic because I just drowned you guys in data. Um, but to relate that data to stories. Oh, I know someone in this group who's admirable, who doesn't have this extreme view, connecting to their values just so people don't make arguments that make sense to themselves and not the other, and then always listening because we're all unique people. We have to see what they're saying.
And I'll just add, I think one of the things that is very powerful about decision education and starting with young people who are of school age is that we can practice these skills in sort of lower heat, lower risk environments. And so things that you can do in the classroom to build these dispositions and folks, having students look for disconfirming evidence, right? Creating opportunities in the classroom for young people to take a stance and then look for all the reasons why that stance could be wrong. Providing opportunities in the classroom and making it a part of the culture of the school and the classroom to update and calibrate your thinking. Even as the teacher in the room saying, like, I thought this before, then I learned this, now I think this. So a lot of what we as adults are not really very skilled at doing in the real world, we get fired up, we get passionate, we have a lot of reasons why we get amped up. We can use what's happening in K-12 classrooms to really develop these skills so they become more second nature to students as they move out into the world and have these in more kind of like naturally occurring environments.
That's awesome, Allie. Thanks. And yeah, hopefully this call is inspiring you to want to be thinking differently. But as Allie said, also hopefully it's inspiring you to want to reach the young people in your life, whether you're an educator or a parent or a neighbor, a church member, or whatever, to try to get it. Because as Allie said, you can have one kind of conversation at that age that helps set the stage. So thanks for sharing. Okay, we have a great insight here. I hope I'm pronouncing Malay I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Malay calls us to be dialectical, which he defines as looking at something from different perspectives and interpreting that in multiple different ways that are seeing all of those different ways as valid. And he says that intellectual humility, which Allie, you talked a lot about intellectual humility. He says that intellectual humility is a prerequisite. You have to be able to have intellectual humility in order to be dialectical. Um, Mallet, thank you, Mallet. I appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, so I think that's a great point and further adds to Mark. Mallet, if there's anything else you'd like to unmute and share on that topic, I think it's a good call for us to think dialectically.
Mallet, are you sharing? I think you're on mute.
Oh yes. Oh, thank you for that. The only thing I would add is that thinking dialectically is easier said than done. So the sooner we start helping people get into that practice, presumably in K through 12, then the better. The more people have that habit as they get older and start voting and engaging different perspectives.
Certainly, you're not going to hear any arguments from us at the Alliance. We definitely believe that getting these skill sets in the hands of K-12 students is wonderful. So thank you for sharing that. Allie and James, I'm wondering if you could wave a magic wand and instill either one piece of knowledge or skill or mindset into our citizenry, whether that's students in particular or just more broadly, that you think will better help us have more effective civil dialogue, what would that piece of knowledge or that skill or that mindset be?
Easy peasy. No, I'm just kidding. I think what I would love to instill is just a more critical look at how confident we are in the things we believe. And the idea here being not that like we want to all, we want to have confidence that we are competent and skilled and can move through the world. Um, able to do the things we want to do. But I think we see it so much how stuck and firmly people hold to their beliefs. And I think I'd really love to see people who are a little more agile and willing to calibrate their thinking as they learn something new. And that something we talk a lot about is that can become part of your identity rather than the thing you believe being your identity. Your identity is being someone who updates their thinking as they learn something new. So I think just tempering and calibrating our confidence about how true something is that we believe and being flexible and agile in our thinking as we gather new evidence and hear new viewpoints to update our thinking, I think is crucial.
Yeah. Well, I guess our focus is on showing that we're more similar across the political spectrum than we tend to realize. And More Like Us is very focused on scale. We actually go beyond the classroom. So right, that just becomes kind of like common knowledge, is actually a goal of ours. I'd say, sorry if I can't, so Mallet, you know, so a slight difference, not that one is better than another, is that More Like Us sometimes is less cognitive, right? That just how do we feel about another group? It can be a little bit more guttural, right? When we hear things about them and recognize another group, is better than we expect, is not as threatening as we expect. There may be a cognitive process involved, but not necessarily, right? So it's just kind of like knowing generally who they are, and sometimes it's a sense that people can get once they're exposed to enough information in different forms, sometimes in more story form, not just data.
And I'd like to just say we have lots of experts in the room, in the Zoom room here with us. So I would love to invite anyone else. This is James and I are just two people with two viewpoints. Please feel free to share because this is such a great question.
Mark, I see your hand for free.
Oh, I was just thinking it'd be nice to have a way to develop a culture of having, people being able to air different ideas more freely. I think Annie Duke talked about that when she was playing poker or in some of her decision stuff. If you're the person that comes up with the best different idea or something, that was more celebrated than being the same. But probably takes a lot to get to those changes and being comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I think the closest that we get is to the causes of perception gaps, right? They're perverse incentives, and typically incentives in news media and social media and electoral systems uh, tend to encourage playing to one's own audience, right? Getting people riled up with highly emotional content gets people angry, outraged, infuriated, whatever. And that doesn't tend to lead that. There are some people who are trying to work on algorithms about that, but I'd say, right, if people realize we're more similar, then possibly it's okay to have these kind of mixed views of groups rather than just good and bad.
Wonderful. And that goes very similarly. I want to make sure Jenna's comment doesn't get lost. She brought up these points of social media outlets where we get our news. James, to your point about polarization, that's sort of all tied in together. Thanks for illuminating that. We'll go to Eric, and then I wasn't sure, Carl, were you raising your hand as well? Okay, perfect.
Yes,
Okay,
I can't find it on there.
sure. I understand. I understand. So, Eric, did you want to share something, and then we can go to Carl right after that?
Sure. So I think the intellectual humility point is really important and is also really hard. And I think not only do we naturally struggle to be humble, but we also struggle relatedly, we struggle to be good accountants. So what I've noticed about myself is um, I frequently think that after the fact I was right, but when in fact I write things down beforehand and I am a good accountant, I find that I'm not nearly as right as I thought I was. And to that end, what I would encourage people to do, I'm not encouraging anyone to bet, but there are plenty of sites that have, like, for example, political markets. And if you have, I have my own political views. I go on, I look at it, and I see that the marketplace is significantly different in what they're thinking than I am. And what I've done sometimes, and actually had Annie do as well, was to write down what our opinions were and sort of fake bet, and and then later come back to it. And I can tell you that for me, I thought I would have been doing quite a bit better than in fact I did.
That's such a great point. Yeah, one way to develop intellectual humility is to stare the fact down that we are so often wrong, and we don't often do that in our daily lives. And so, having the opportunity to participate in experiences like the one you mentioned or others, maybe forces us to encounter that reality a bit more than we normally would. Thank you for sharing, Carl.
Thank you. So I've gotten drawn into this question of civil discourse through some university work and so on, and have attended Bravery Angels and stuff like this. And the thing I see is mostly people trying to create trust in the room and empathy across and learn through that and maybe close that perception gap that you're talking about. It's wonderful. But ultimately, I have framed this in my mind as the purpose of it is to make up one's mind in a better way. Okay. And know when I make up my mind on something, I can also express in a dialectic sense the other person's point of view to the point where I say, I know why you made up your mind differently in such a way that they can say, yeah, you got it. Okay. If that's the purpose of civil discourse, then making up my mind is a decision. It's actually a high-level policy decision in our mindset and guides lots of further decisions for us. And that's why we're also engaged with this. We want to open those up and make them better. Okay. Well, once you take that lens of making it a decision, then it fits into this whole framework of decision education, everything we do, not just from the behavioral cognitive biases so on side, but also from the prescriptive of what do you have to do to make up your mind well? What do you have to consider? What do you like I try to engage people on what do we truly care about in this with this across the spectrum, and make the list comprehensive so everything we care about in the room is there on the list. So it's only a matter of weights. You care about number one on this, but 70%, and I only consider that's worth 10% in mine. Okay. But having that conversation as a part of resolving what we should do in terms of making up our minds, and not going all the way to policy or action, which we normally do in decision making, just to the point of where everyone can say, I've made up my mind and I know why I did, in the sense of meeting the requirements of decision quality, and I know why you did it differently. That put a whole different frame on me, and I'm hoping to find a way to integrate that both into decision education, but also because it's a great vehicle. It's much better than just learning about decisions. Is I can have the kind of powerful conversations across the divide with people. And James, what you put out with that perception gap, to me, that's the building block you start from. That and the behavioral and the cognitive is a great way to get into it. But you're not done until you can say, I've made up my mind this way on immigration, and I know that you've made it up differently, and I can state how you made up your mind well enough that you say, you got it. Then I think we've gotten as far as we can.
Wow, Carl, that is a profound point, and I thank you so much for sharing it so eloquently. And a lot of people would ask, why is this? A lot of times when you think about decisions, you think about, do I buy the red sports car or the blue minivan? But decisions, if we can reframe what a decision is, then we suddenly bring so much more power into our lives. And so that was so well said, and I really appreciate you sharing it. Mark, I see your hand up. I'm going to get to you, I promise, but we're getting near to our hour. Mark, I'll stay after and we'll make sure that we get your question addressed. But for those that have to hop right at the end of the hour, I just want to bring us together. First of all, I really want to thank Allie and James for tremendous, tremendous, tremendous presentation and getting our ball rolling and just a fantastic conversation. Thanks everyone for joining. Allie, I think you have some slides with our organization. If you wouldn't mind throwing that up. I'll also say we will be sending out an email today following this. It will include a survey. Please, 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 we are begging you to complete that survey and be honest with us. We want to know if you liked it, if you didn't like it, what was good, what was not good, what needs to change. We want to know it all. So please be on the lookout for that. We'll also, in that email, going to encourage you to consider signing up for our newsletter. The Alliance for Decision Education has a wonderful set of resources, a wonderful series of programs and opportunities year round. And the best way to stay informed on those is to sign up for our newsletter. So you'll get that email this afternoon, and we will ask, please, if you could, be sure to complete that survey and do sign up to join our newsletter. We would love, love, love to have you. For those that are hopping, thanks so much. We hope to see you. As Ali mentioned at the beginning, we're going to be doing webinars just like this one every Monday in June and July on a different topic. So go ahead and check out the full list of what we're providing, and we've got some great ones lined up. So be sure to join us. Thanks for joining. And Mark will definitely stay after. So feel free, please unmute yourself. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. I just wanted to follow up on Carl's. I think listening so that the other people know you're completely understood is important. And it might be two ways that might help are they talked about having political discussions and riling stuff up. So take an example of COVID, where, oh, do we get the kids back in school or not? And progressives were protect the teachers, let's keep them safe. And conservatives more, we have to get them in school. If people are wearing masks, they can't understand the emotional interactions between people and stuff. And so it was a political discussion. But if they'd had, a thoughtful discussion, when people, it turned out that kids weren't as susceptible to COVID or didn't get it as much. So you could bring it in. And so if you could have looked at it, if we spotlight those, that might be good. And then the other thing is the Alliance for Decision Education has a structured decision-making part. And I was just going to ask if people talk about values, what's important in the values or objectives of a certain problem, they could probably discuss that across political lines rather than what actions or alternatives they're going to take. So I wondered what you thought about those two things.
Well, I was just going to say, kind of on a more like universal level, I think all of the comments today sort of, I think, highlight the fact that all of these types of conversations take skills that we don't have, yet we have these conversations all the time. There's a lot of really great structures and protocols. Mark, I think you might have alluded to some earlier, and I know like Braver Angels uses these, but protocols for having these types of challenging civil discourse. And they're really structured. And if you've ever experienced one and come out of it, you're like, oh, wow, I was able to talk about really hard things with people I'm pretty sure I disagree with, and we didn't get to a really heated, unproductive place, but it's because there was a facilitator helping us through it. So we can't always have a facilitator helping us through it, but I think one of the things that we really want to at the Alliance reiterate is that there are skills and tools that we can use and that we can learn that we just, most people don't learn them, certainly not in schools and generally not anywhere. And so that's what we are really hoping decision education can accomplish, because this work, it is hard. It is hard to engage with on controversial topics and with opinions we don't understand or agree with. But the good news is that there are so many tools to help us.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the field, not decision education, but I mean, I guess what could be called bridge building, Braver Angels has been almost exclusively focused on conversations. But right, how do we how do we think about fellow Americans? Well, yes, it can be through interpersonal communication, but it is also from what we see and hear about those. So if we're talking about COVID, right, there are financial incentives, there are perverse incentives to say this is a battle, right? There is a masks view and there is a no masks view, and that is how the world works. And there are groups that say one or the other, and there are two options. And I mean that's an extreme form, but right, like that pays, right? That tends to get clicks, right? Having very nuanced conversations that go in all sorts of directions tend to be kind of boring. And so, right, that's not usually the way to get millions of views on YouTube, or to, right, be the first story. If it bleeds, it leads, right? Because that nuance, it probably just bores. More effective, but like, right, not exactly the moneymaker.
Right. So it's hard to get people in something where you have like a fully participatory facilitation exercise. So it'd be nice to know how we, can build those structures into how we make decisions or conversations and stuff.
Well, the wonderful thing is in the classroom, this is possible, right? Because students are there. So, right, I mean, for adults, it can be more challenging because there aren't necessarily those spaces. But for students, right, if they're there for 180 days a year, you can utilize that for good to really grapple with different topics.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that worked, I think, well during like Earth Day and the climate. The kids we were taught about, the carbon cycle and water and pollution and so on. And then we go home and ask our parents all these questions. So it changed how, it brought the issues home to them. So it's not a bad strategy, I don't think. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks
you
so
very
much,
much.
Mark.
We so appreciate you coming and your engagement and just your insights that you were sharing. So thank you, and your questions. Really, really appreciate you being here. And thanks to everybody who's still on the line.
All right, thanks for doing this series. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, we hope to see you more.
Okay, take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you.
Mm.